Hi, and welcome everyone to our expert interview panel conversation today with three amazing women leaders that have navigated or are navigating being a family caregiver, having high expectations in the workforce, and also experiencing grief in all forms. So we know this is an incredibly common reality in the world today, not just in the United States. And super excited to have this candid, unedited conversation with these women. Welcome, everybody.
Hi.
Oh, let's just go around the room. Linda, do you want to introduce yourself? And what we'll do is Hollywood Squares. Just introduce who you are really from more the human side first, and as well as in the corporate or vocational side.
Okay. My name is Linda Polio, and I was originally from New Jersey, but I spent most of my adult life in New York. I was an advertising executive for a long time, and eventually ended up becoming the world's first chief consciousness officer. In the process, I was taking care of my father for a year, and I took care of my mother for 24/7 for 9 years, and came to Sedona, Arizona in March of 2020 as the pandemic was getting going. I am a consciousness doula and the founder of Hearts of Fire Consulting. I'm really committed to bringing heart-based work into corporations and into leadership. And I'm the author of Trusting the Currents, which is an Amazon bestseller, inspirational fiction, and a multi-award winner. And I'm really happy to be here because caregiving completely transformed my life. And I wish I had known a lot more about it before I got engaged in it. So I'm happy to be able to participate in helping other people who are going through not only the challenge of caregiving, but the grief associated with it, and the fact that it always ends in death. So there's a lot to talk about here.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Linda. Patty, please introduce yourself.
I'd love to. Hi, everybody. I'm Patty Kentgen. I would say that all of the things that Linda just said about grief and the process and the journey of caregiving probably apply to me right now. And it, as you can tell, it has already caught me.
I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. I am a daughter. I am a nurse. I am a sister. And I really feel like I am in probably one of the most interesting, growth producing, loving times in my life, between the joy that I get in providing care to my mom, who's 90 and a half years old and lives with me, and the incredible work that I get to do professionally in advancing the notion of decentralizing care and bringing it all back into the home. And sort of everything that really means in terms of how we have to change our significantly broken healthcare system, and what that means not only to groups of people, but to us as individuals who will provide care to our loved ones and experience care provided to ourselves at some point in time as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Just for context, I'm sitting in Flagstaff, Arizona, and my spouse Juanita and I lived here for years before we moved to Tucson. And this was shortly after her father died. And we knew that we were moving into a period of potential caregiving for Juanita's mother. And so we spent 9 years in Tucson. And professionally, that presented a wonderful opportunity for me. I stepped into the role of director of spiritual wellness for the wellness company Canyon Ranch. I've been trained as a theologian and as a minister and transpersonal psychologist. So it was this extraordinary time of integrating all of my leadership experience and my expertise professionally. But it was also a time of significant transition for us, because what ended up happening is Juanita left her corporate position. She'd been in a global leadership role for a company and assumed full-time care for her mom. And in the last 3 years of her mom's life, Juanita managed 24-hour care in her mom's home, which was a few miles from our house, and hospice care for those years. And so my role was being the support person for a spouse who assumed a really challenging and extraordinary responsibility. As Patty was speaking, and I heard this in Linda's voice too, I could appreciate the sacrifice and the pain and the joy of being that primary caregiver. And my position was a bit different because professionally I was supporting people, many bereaved people, and many people who are also caregiving, and then trying to support a spouse, and also having my own experience of that journey. So I kind of land in a different spot, but one of deep respect for people who are primary caregivers.
Thank you. So glad you're here, Stephanie. So I'd like to kind of flow this conversation in a way that identifies a little more than what's already been identified. What's true, what are the challenges, what's the reality in the workplace, particularly, and with population aging, and the multifamily household, and so on and so forth. And Stephanie, you really bring clinical knowledge and expertise around grief, grief as as an emotion, as a stage in life, as a process, and one that also can have health complications, if not, so I'd like to pull that into the conversation. So yeah, what is true? And then what's possible? How can we look at, what are, if you as N of one or a collective of three, could execute magic to make it better for everybody else, what do you see as possible? And that's how we'll flow the conversation. So Patty, can you share a little bit more about what you see as being true in terms of like the challenge or the problem as in the workplace and from caregiving and grief?
I think there's a couple of things that come to mind when I think about the workplace as a place that supports and honors employees that are faced with these challenges, because at some point many are. I think that the acknowledgement that much like supporting new parents who have new children and new babies that come into their lives, I actually think of this in very much a parallel way. It's an employee who is on a journey that needs to be supported, because if they're not, then they can't possibly be the kind of employee that organization needs to have in terms of fully productive and engaged and connected. And so I have to say that I am very fortunate to be in an organization that has honored what I've been saying, which is my job, my professional job is second. And I say that inside of my employment organization, I say that to other employees and colleagues, and I actually watch for their reaction. I have been sort of experimenting with this now over the last year, because it's very telling, those who immediately get what that means, and those who are like, what do you mean? What do you mean your job's not first? My job's not first, because my job is not how I identify myself. My job and my main role is to be the best human I can in the settings in which I'm engaging in. And so first and foremost, it's my home. And so I bring everything that I'm experiencing in my own home with my own circumstance to my customers, my health system partners, my providers, my clinicians. to help them get a better sense for actually what it means every time they say to a patient or to a loved one of a patient, I need you to do this, your mom needs to be on this, you need to consider this, because there is really a foundational lack of understanding from a truly patient-centric, in their own home, the safest place that they feel that they can be in, understanding of what these orders and these wishes that clinicians have really mean. So tying sort of a couple pieces together here, I work for a healthcare services company that honors the fact that my first and foremost priority is caring for my mom above everything else. I also think that that is an anomaly in today's employment environment. And I think that as the boomer generation starts to age out, we're going to see benefit plans design and employee benefit plans start to change to honor this next life stage that many of their employees are going to find themselves in. It's not going to be about necessarily, 100% about, we need to have a lactation room for the lactating mom. We need to make sure that we have benefits for the dad who's a new father. We need to actually honor the fact that every employee is going through a life stage, and that life stage is a predictor for how effective and how great an employee they're going to be within the organization.
Got that. That goes to the end, like what's possible. That's I'm going to come back to that. Thank you. Linda, you've been through it. What problem, like you were working for a high pressure ad agency in New York City and caregiving. I know there's been some space for you between that, but what do you see as being true, the problem, the challenges?
Well, I think, for me, it was a long process for me. It started, I think, first of all, I've always been a caregiver. I've been the one with friends and family that was called every time there was a problem. And I think when you have that kind of reputation, everyone just sort of leans on you more. So you put pressure on yourself to be the person that everybody thinks you should be because you're the best at it. And it all began with me. My mother had a stroke. And I was consulting. I had left the advertising industry as a corporate person, but I was consulting within the industry and I was doing well. And my mother had a stroke and I decided to take care of her for, it turned out being a 2-year period. That was my kind of initiation. And it was very difficult, but, and by the time it was over, she came out of it. She regained complete control of everything by the end of that 2-year period, but I was exhausted. I was not capable of starting my own business again because I was just mentally drained, physically drained, and emotionally shattered by the experience. So I decided I need to go back to work. So I took a job, and that's when I became a chief consciousness officer. I ended up going back into a marketing consultancy, and it gave me structure that I needed at that point in time. But about 1.5 years into it, I was feeling better. I had kind of regained my financial footing because I hadn't worked in 2 years taking care of my mother. So my finances were shattered by the time that was over. So in 1.5 years, I kind of got my financial footing back, and I kind of got my reputation back within the industry and really got to know a bunch of people and decided that I was going to start my own business again. So I quit my job, and 4 hours later, my mother fell and shattered her femur. So that began 9 years of 24/7 care. And, Patty, I completely understand where you are. I was an extremely strong, competent woman, both in the business world and in my personal life. And what started as me thinking that I can handle this, and being the oldest and the only woman in my family, I became the natural caregiver. Everyone thought that I was so strong, so no one really helped me all that much. And I think that sort of happens a lot, particularly to women, is they just assume that you can handle everything. And as I continued going down the rabbit hole deeper and deeper, and eventually I started working with with, caregivers I were bringing to the home, but, I was managing every aspect of my mother's life, the house, her health, her finances, the family matters. And it was very, very difficult. And I slowly lost all of my own life. I slowly lost my career. I slowly lost my finances. And eventually towards the end, I really started losing my health. So I look back now at, how I would have handled it better, because I would have had more boundaries. And I think when you become a caregiver, you really don't know what you're getting into. And I think if there was some kind of program and processes that when you become a caregiver that you are able to tap into, like people like me who have gone through it, and other people that have had different aspects of it, so you can understand what is ahead of you and what resources you may have available and how to communicate to the people around you. Because part of my problem was I was so busy, I didn't ask for help. And that doesn't go well. So by the time that was over with my mother, I was pretty much shattered. And I didn't know how to start again. I had all these health problems. And I think it was helpful if I had had a support, even like someone that was an organization said, go have a massage. And when I finished my process, I really wanted to work within the caregiving community, because unless you go down that rabbit hole, you really don't understand exactly what's down there. You can imagine it. When I was a chief consciousness officer, my whole process was about bringing what I call the human technologies of wisdom, intuition, compassion, empathy, forgiveness, and gratitude into corporate culture. And that has been a long time passion of mine. I think as we go through this global transformation and everyone is having all kinds of problems, we really need our corporations to step up and really show the way as sort of humanity leaders. And by providing them with these kinds of tools and employee programs and partnerships, and I think it could, it won't only help the individuals and the employees, but it will eventually help the bottom line of the companies that are involved with this. So yeah, my journey was probably more intense than most people. That may go for a few months, maybe a couple of years, but it taught me a lot, and I am extremely well prepared. And most of my grieving actually happened before my mother died, because I was grieving for the loss of the relationship, and I was grieving for the loss of my life, and I was grieving for a lot. By the time my mother died, it was a relief. And then there's the guilt associated with the relief of that. So it was a really unusual life experience that I don't think a lot of people have. But I think, again, as boomers age, because boomers transform whatever they touch, they transformed racism and, women coming into the workplace, and they just change everything they touch. And the last thing for them to change is death. And I believe that as we move into that process of how we die, we will start transforming the way we die, and corporations have a big role in that in the future.
Wow. Thank you, Linda. Stephanie, what do you want to share?
Yeah, I'm so appreciating Patty and Linda's stories, because one of the themes that I hear, that I recognize, is the isolation. And how workplaces can be certainly places of support, but often where they are lacking is providing opportunities for connection with colleagues. And I think that's where, in my experience, caring for aging parents differs from being a parent of younger children, right? Parents find each other and support each other. And I heard a hospice physician say the difference experientially is when you're raising children, hopefully they're growing and maturing, and there are opportunities to celebrate that process. And when you're caring for an aging parent, you're usually older and you're tired, and you have more of a care burden that you're carrying, and the person is deteriorating and dying, which we've already spoken to. So that isolation and that sense of community. And then my other perspective is that of leading people who are professional caregivers. And we're already in a crisis in the US healthcare wise, because our healthcare system's been radically impacted by the pandemic. And now we've got caregivers who have children they're caring for and also parents they're caring for. And is that sustainable? What are the long-term consequences for that? And working in a wellness organization, I was very attuned to that. Who are the people I'm leading that, like me, are either in a support position or a primary caregiver position, and they are a full-time caregiver as a professional, right? Whether they're a social worker or a psychologist or a physician or a nurse or you name the role. The other thing that we haven't spoken to that I just want to mention is that I think we make a lot of assumptions culturally about what people should do when they become responsible for aging parents. And as a person whose spouse is a Black woman, whose mother was a Black woman, we knew that we needed to provide the safest environment for her. She felt safest at home. She felt safest being cared for by people who could relate to her experience. We know there are challenges in the healthcare system around equity and just care. And so our decisions were based on our lives and the particularities of who is involved. And I know I heard over and over, especially in the last years of her life, why aren't you moving her into a nursing home? Why aren't you moving her into a long-term care facility? And I felt no need to explain the layers of decision-making involved in that, but workplaces often make assumptions about what's in the best interest of the workplace. You know, what's in the best interest of many workplaces is make sure you're getting care outside the home so that you can show up to work 50, 60, 70 hours a week and perform at the highest levels as a leader. And that was really challenged for us. And I know that when we were making decisions about our own employment, Juanita leaving a high level leadership position in a corporation, it was a values-based decision. It was what this parent that I love wants and needs, that I feel committed to providing, requires a sacrifice. And there are always sacrifices in caregiving. Career sacrifices, economic sacrifices, if you're as engaged as we're talking about being engaged and making that choice. So those are some things that I certainly can speak to from, again, supporting a caregiver and supporting professional caregivers.
Ladies, any comments?
There is something that Linda said, and Stephanie, thank you. There are a couple things that sparked a couple ideas in my brain based upon what you said as well. There's something that I thought maybe we could come back to, Linda, that you said, and I think it's very foundational to kind of a little bit of when we jumped into the conversation and y'all were talking about sort of the specific gender roles as it relates to caregivers and caregiving. You said something along the lines of asking for help, right? And the assumption of typically caregivers give off a vibe that, I'm strong, I can handle this. I know what I need to do. I'm grabbing the resources that I need around me, much to and often to the detriment of one's own self. And I'm curious to hear from you all about the notion of asking for help. And do we actually permission ourselves to ask for help? And are we perhaps stuck in a gender biased way, traditionally, that women often lack the skills to ask for help or feel that they're not permissioned to ask for help? I'm curious about that as a foundational principle within the notion of caregiving, because if one is not able to ask for help, the role of the caregiver will in fact lead to, Linda, what you shared, risks to one's own health, risks to one's own, emotional, physical, spiritual well-being, etc. So I wanted to sort of tee that up for everybody, because I think it's an interesting paradigm, quite honestly, and I won't rant on this conversation, but it a little bit ties to women. We as a group tend to apologize for a lot. And so is there a parallel between our apologizing for things, I'm sorry, and our inability or decided lack of capability in asking for help, especially as it relates to the role of caregiver?
Sizzle. Oh, it's good. Linda, you're on mute.
Sorry, I didn't want to sneeze or something. I know for me, part of it is because I had been so strong my life, and I had been a family leader and a corporate leader and a leader among my friends, and I was the one everyone went to. So it was not, particularly in the beginning, it was fine because I could handle so many more things than anyone else around me. And when you're extremely competent, that sometimes does not work in your favor.
Oh, it's a penalty. It's competency penalties.
As people find in
also,
companies.
I think it's also, what I'm hearing is it might be really difficult to not ask for help, burdensome. Certainly the outcomes on health are, clear. It's easier than doing the hard thing, right? The emotional, like the new behavior.
Well,
Stepping into vulnerability and what perceived weakness. And that it doesn't matter if you're a male or if as a human being, to do the thing that might not be healthy might be easier than forging a new path.
Well, I also think, and I mean, this was definitely for me, and I think for a lot of people, when you're in the trenches of caregiving, you are in literally moment to moment decision making. Moment to moment, you have to do this. I have to call this doctor. Oh, she fell. Oh, I got to do that. You're in moment to moment. So a lot of it is you don't have time to instruct and inform people as to what you need, because the work that has to be done is so immediate that by the time you ask for help, explain what you need, and then explain to people how it's done, there's not enough time. So you take the action that you need and you go, next time I'll ask for help. But caregiving is not, it's a very moment to moment experience, and you don't have a lot of time, and most people don't have the capabilities to learn quickly. And this is what happened with, I had two brothers, and it was actually easier for me to do things myself than try to call them, explain what I needed, explain to them how it had to be done. And then even if they tried, they would screw something up. Like they would call I can't tell you how many times I got calls from doctor's offices after I asked a brother to contact them about something about my mother, who said, who was that person you sent? They were yelling at us. They didn't know what they were talking about. So it was ultimately easier for me to take the reins and manage it myself. And I think that is probably the biggest problem I had. Was it wasn't like you planned, I'm going to need this and this and this, so you can plan to ask for help. The help you needed was right then, and you didn't have time. So I don't know how, it's almost like the structures need to be there in the beginning. Part of it is the healthcare system is abysmal. So if the healthcare system was better, then it wouldn't be as hard on caregivers. Caregivers do what the healthcare system should be doing. So if we could improve the healthcare system, it would help caregivers, and maybe we could do better planning. But when something happens to someone you love and there's no one else there, and you need to do these 15 things, and these 15 things need to be done immediately, you don't have time to find someone to help you.
You go into survival mode. You can't
It's
see
totally
what you
survival
need.
mode.
You're just trying to, like you said, moment to moment survive.
Yeah,
It's
and
weird.
caregivers are one after another. It's like one thing after another.
You're
Every
right.
day is another survival mode.
which means sleep deprivation and in constant cortisol, fight or
Mhm.
flight. Yeah, that's why the health is such a big deal. So, well, this isn't going to go away. I mean, the healthcare system won't change overnight.
No.
It's encouraging, Patty, to hear, from you about how supportive your organization, Medically Home, is.
And I think a large part of that is due to really what we're trying to do, which is honor really a past point in time, and quite honestly, in other cultures where it is the responsibility of the family to care for the elder. And, we used the word entitlement earlier in the conversation. In the US, we feel very entitled to, I'm going to write a check, or somebody else is going to write a check to provide care to my loved one because that's available. And in fact, I'd actually say, why? Why do we have that expectation? Why is it? Why is it not clearly an understanding that my responsibility as a daughter and as a family member is to care for my elder? But because this is available, we have the ability to, like I said, write a check or pass my loved one off to a skilled nursing facility or a nursing home or some other care setting, when in fact, I challenge all of us to say it's our responsibility to care for our elders. And until we all actually embrace that, the healthcare system's not going to change in a meaningful way. We as consumers, I think, actually have to send that message and change that. And then we have to have the structures, the healthcare system structures, to actually allow us to be great caregivers, to offer that kind of care to our elders at home.
Yeah.
I just want to add that I think the biggest societal challenge to what Patty's speaking to is that we don't live, many of us, perhaps having this conversation or who would be listening to this conversation, in those multi-generational households that would allow for that sustained care of an elder. And that's in part what creates such a demand on the primary caregiver. Siblings live in other states, or they just assume they don't have to be engaged because one person's going to take on the heroic task of caring for the parent, often a female, right? So to be able to provide that care, we have to live differently in order to sustain the long-term effort of it. And that's a real dilemma.
And actually what you just characterized, Stephanie, is a very conscious and active decision that my sister and I made now about 15 months ago. We were at the point of, at some point we're going to be playing rock, paper, scissors, who's staying overnight at mom's on the inflatable mattress tonight and tomorrow night and the night after that. And do we not have a moment, a critical moment, where we could actually come together and create an environment that works, quite honestly, really well for all three of us in a multi-generational home, and create a very special place for then that caregiving to happen in a way that honors the needs that we have as caregivers and the needs that she has as a care receiver. I think your point about sort of the fragmented nature of parents and children in terms of living situations is very, very real. But I also think that there's very active choices, and I'll use Linda, your word around sacrifices. There are sacrifices that we are able to make if we find those right moments in time. I would not change the decision I made 15 months ago. I have said to my organization, I am happier today than at any other point in my life. And yet I'm at probably one of the more stressful points in my life. It's a very strange paradigm and paradox for me.
Wow.
I mean, I think a big part of it too is, I think, is recognizing caregivers. I think a lot of times within families, caregivers are not recognized for what they're doing because the other family members don't want to rock the boat. You know, they don't want to act like you're doing anything really great because, oh my God, you may ask me for help. And in corporations even, and in business, if they could recognize, a lot of times I think it was just, if someone had just said to me, you're doing a great job, and recognize the sacrifices I was making. And, you know, I also wanted to do it. It was my mother, she had raised me. I wanted to be part of her exit. But after a while, I mean, maybe because for me, it was such a long while, I didn't know why I was doing it except for her, but I didn't know why I was doing it for anyone else, because there was I didn't feel any recognition of myself that I had made the right decision. And I think if I had had outside recognition, I would have seen the light. And I think that's a really big, you know, kind of a big gift that can be given from either a corporate perspective or from a family perspective. Just recognize those caregivers and what they're doing for you and what they're doing for the culture.
It's a great point, Linda. And so is Patty talking about, you know, the policies and benefits plans. We have how many generations in the workforce? So why not, you know, have a menu based on your life stage or life circumstances that you draw down those particular benefits? Yeah. So really great conversation. I'm wondering if we can wrap with, you know, the potential, looking at maybe just sharing a couple of words that you have for other women, family caregivers, or we haven't really touched on the grief part. So, you know, if somebody is recovering from being a caregiver for a loved one, a couple of words that you would share for resilience or hindsight.
I'll share on the resilience side. I think that there is an opportunity. I think about you know, sort of different phases of one's life where we get performance coaching. I get performance coaching if I want to be an athlete or if I want to go into a particular sport. I get performance coaching if I want to excel in my, you know, sort of chosen profession. Where is there coaching for caregivers? And so I keep thinking of this idea of, you know, maybe it's grassroots, and Stephanie, you were great because it was such a logical light bulb. You said other parents find other parents, but caregivers don't find other caregivers. And I think that I think there's a lot of reasons for that. One of which we may not feel capable or able to have the kinds of vulnerable conversations that come with caregiving and being a caregiver in our workplace, in our communities, in the groups that we belong to. So if there was a way to create a caregiver coaching network that actually was just a support network, a framework for people to get connected to somebody else, Linda, to your point, who has lived through the experience, who has lived through the post-traumatic stress that you've come through, lived through the grieving process from start to finish. Because I think that that validation that we don't get within our family, right? From the brother who says, I know you're doing a lot for mom, thank you for what you do. Just that validation. If we can't get it within our family unit, then we need to have a network that offers that. The healthcare system today does not offer that because they don't understand what it's like to be a caregiver inside of a patient's home, inside of a person's home. They just don't, unless they're actually doing it themselves on a personal note. And that saddens me as a nurse, because I think that that is one of the things that was a guiding principle for me coming out of nursing school, was being able to be empathetic and really live in the shoes of what people are living with their disease, with their loved ones with a disease, et cetera. So for me, my resilience is, as I go through this process, I know that I will have a lot to offer. Is there a way to create a formal or informal or whatever kind of a caregiving coaching network?
Great. I do want to mention that I think that's right. I worked for a startup company for a couple of years called Life Guides, and they started with, it's peer-to-peer support, but the person guiding, listening, bringing wisdom forward is on the other side of being a caregiver for a loved one. And that is an untapped resource. There's also a company called Carilo, CARILO Loop. And their entire business is dedicated to supporting the family caregiver with coaching and resources and so forth. And they're an employee benefit. I met them at anyway. So great point. Yeah, sometimes it's just safer to be able to have a neutral person to talk to. And yes, it can be a therapist. It can be, Stephanie, a PhD, grief expert, chaplain, but it can also be someone that has wisdom that's not going to judge you for, thinking bad things about a family member, or, not loving what you're doing, right? It's not, some people love it and have the mindset of, this is a gift and I am so honored. It's hard and I'm glad it's a gift. And other people don't feel that way, but they're in that. Yeah. Stephanie, what do you want to share?
What's coming to mind, focusing more on the interior, is acceptance. I think my observation is that one of the hardest aspects of caregiving an aging parent, a dying parent, or family member or spouse, is we want things to be different. Right? It's hard work to age. It's not necessarily a pleasant journey for that person. It's hard to die. There can also, like Patty spoke to, be the paradoxical element. It can be the most joyful journey, but it's hard work. And so much, I think, of our suffering in that process comes from resisting how things are unfolding and reacting to that, wanting the circumstances to be different. And there's absolutely something to be said for making change, right? Cultural change, institutional change, organizational change. But this is more about change of mindset, change of perception, accepting the person you're caring for and how they've decided to go about aging and dying, accepting the limitations where they exist of family members. I know I experienced, as someone who is deeply impacted by the caregiving process, but not in control of it, many moments where I had to accept, this is how my life is being impacted by it. This is how my relationship is being impacted. This is how my capacity to perform at work and support other people is being impacted. And having to do a lot of acceptance work around that, rather than default to, which many women leaders are masterful at doing, how do I get control of this situation? Right? Whether it's intellectually in control of this situation or control of the other people in the room and how they're behaving and what they're wanting this to look like. But just, this is what it is.
Wow.
I
love that. It's just stay in the flow.
Right. But that's hard.
Even if it's a hard flow.
Right. I mean, practically speaking, I was out yesterday and I ran into an old friend who spent the last years caring for her parents. They both died now. And she was telling me that she spent the last months traveling because she couldn't go anywhere for years. And I chuckled and I said, oh, I remember the vacations planned that were canceled because a family member couldn't come and provide care. I was sort of reflecting, laughing now, but at the time I was pissed. I was pissed. What do you mean I can't go on vacation? What do you mean I can't leave town without making sure we have someone who's available to provide support? I remember trying to go out to dinner one night, and we needed to instead cancel the dinner plans and go to mom's house and kind of address the fact that she was having a difficult time and the caregivers were having a difficult time. And that's what needed to happen first. So acceptance.
Good one. Thank you. Linda, any words of wisdom?
Well, I mean, I think two things kind of pop in. You know, one thing Patty mentioned was the idea of vulnerability. And I think this is a bigger story that goes beyond caregiving. But I think, you know, allowing vulnerability, both, you know, as a caregiver, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, because you always feel like you have to be so strong that you don't allow yourself your own vulnerability. And then whether you're in a corporate environment or a family, allowing other people to be vulnerable. So, you know, finding those resources and finding those spaces where you can kind of spit out your problems you're having, and you will feel safe and you won't be judged, and allowing anyone that you know who is having those experiences to just vent. You don't have to fix anything, but allow them to vent, so that, you know, creating a safe space for vulnerability, I think, is really important. And also just to remember, it ends. It's over. And believe me, after 9 years, I wasn't sure it was ever going to end. I really thought my mother was immortal. And when she finally died, it was like, the one thing I remember thinking is, I wish I had remembered this moment was actually going to come. Because if I had kept the light of that arrival in my mind, I could have looked maybe beyond where I was, even without the support. But it feels so eternal when you're in it, but it does end, and you want to be able to honor the parent or the loved one, whoever it is that you're taking care of. And if you can't be present because you're so freaked out, and you don't know that this is temporary, no matter how long it is still temporary, that it was an eye opener when my mother died, and I went, oh, like, it does end. And then, you know, there's a lot of stuff that comes after that on many different levels, but you do get to recoup yourself. It may take a while, but if you're aware of that, I think, in the process, and you have other people reminding you that it will end, you'll go through the experience very differently.
So nothing lasts forever.
Nothing lasts forever, and, you know, it may feel that way, but it will end. And, you know, I look back at my mother now, and even though how hard it was, I'm grateful that I was there to, you know, guide her in her final journey, even though it was up and down and sideways. But at the time, and many times in the process, I didn't feel that way, because I didn't feel like it was going to end. But when it did end, I was very grateful for the experience.
Well, you all have been amazing, incredible, vulnerable, authentic, and powerful. And I thank you for making time, showing up, and bringing your hearts and your minds for this conversation.
Thanks, Diane, for bringing this up, because this is such important. These are such important conversations to start having now, and you know, we all appreciate that you're holding this fire for us.
You're welcome. All right. Be
Diane,
well.
can I throw one more thing in?
Yes.
Just kind of closing our conversation. I was thinking about the vulnerability, and I was thinking about asking for help. And I would just throw in, it's okay to cry. We don't.
It's okay, Patty.
Crying. And Patty started out crying, and I thought, I love this person. I've never met her, but I love her, because this is how we release physical, mental, emotional, spiritual pain. We
Exactly.
have to cry.
Yeah.
And we don't show up at work and think it's okay to cry. We don't cry with other caregivers. We become these warriors of caregiving, which is a very masculine approach.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's okay
Thank
to
you.
cry.
Wow.
It's necessary
So
to cry.
important.
So cry.
So I will leave you with, I am known as one of the 2 criers in our organization. The other crier is actually my leader, our executive chairman, and it is either he or I or both of us that often cry when we're moved in a meeting. And it's a strange place to feel, because it is very natural for me to cry. It's like, oh, I'm crying again.
Yeah.
To actually experience others experiencing you crying and having that vulnerable moment. And I said to him the other day, I said, we are ambassadors of vulnerability. That is the cultural superpower that we bring to our organization. And I'm with you, Stephanie. I think that crying is a natural thing, and the more you work to suppress it, the worse things are on every possible level.
Yes. I was with I'll just top it with, I was participating, Stephanie, I may have shared this story with you, but I was participating in a Hopi ceremony where a grandmother had come in from the reservation and led a women's full moon ceremony. And at one point at the end of the ceremony, she was very animated and full of life, and like 3 feet tall, and just her energy was 10 feet tall. And at one point she was doing a drumming circle, and she started to cry, and she was a funny person. She just shared, it's okay to cry sometimes. If you don't, your heart will break. And she literally meant it, like for heart health, if you don't allow the tears to come out. And so thank you for that Native American wisdom that you brought forward. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Wow. I hope you all stay in touch, because Patty, you have now a circle. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Take care.